Yo! Welcome to another episode of Gaming with your boy, Mr. C.
Mr. C, gaming with Mr. C.
Alright guys, now that we've had a week with next gen, both the Xbox Series X and the PS5, I figured it would be time for us to sit down and talk about them. I feel like both companies were able to achieve the same thing, but had a very different approach. So let's jump in. Guys, let's go ahead and talk about the obvious, the cosmetics of this console. You have the PS5 here, which just reeks of cheap plastic and is gaudy as hell. But it does have some cool Easter eggs and details. It does say Sony here. And on the inside lip and on the controller, if you can really zoom in, you will see the PlayStation logos. The X, the circle, or is it the cross? I don't know. And the triangle. And then you also have the PlayStation logo back here. And then you have the less gaudier, but also not really that much more appealing Xbox Series X. It is not that luscious of eye candy either. However, it does have a smaller form factor, and it does have this kind of cheap green, which is kind of cool. Neither console is really going to wow you visually, in my opinion, just cosmetically. Plus, it's worth noting for those of you guys who are into those little details, and some gamers are very much into the details. PS5 really cheaped out with some crappy packaging here, flimsy as heck. And Xbox, I felt like kind of took the extra step and just kind of gave you something that was kind of a tip of a cap from the creator to the person who just spent $500 on their console. Alright guys, let's go ahead and get into the controllers. And as you can see here, we're going to start with the Xbox Series X controller. They took a more subtle, yet similar approach that they did in previous generations. And they did some slight modifications to their already brilliant controller. Now, the first thing is they have a newer styled D-pad, yet it is a little noisy. We have some updated grips here on the back and on the triggers. And then as you probably noticed, we have this new share button, which I absolutely love. The fact that you can tap it for screenshots or hold it for video recording. I just absolutely hate its placement. I am often looking for it, which maybe is something I'll get used to over time. Now, one thing that you'll also notice before I get this is we're still using batteries here, which, doesn't bother me. I will say that battery-wise, this lasted me days of playing, whereas this guy right here, I had to charge the same day. Now, you will probably notice, and you'll see this as a common theme throughout this episode, is that PlayStation really took a different approach with everything, and that's fine. So we do have the new DualSense controller, which has a less in-your-face light bar, if you will. We have some grippage here on the back with some tensioned triggers. The most noticeable difference is something you feel, and that's the haptic feedback with the vibrations that are felt throughout the entire controller, which is simply brilliant. This is by far my favorite PlayStation controller of all time, and maybe even my favorite controller of all time. One little hang-up I did have is you see this PlayStation logo right here. Whenever they show it on screen, it's the old one, the circular one. So it's a weird that they would have it different on the actual controller, but still, a great controller. To the UI, and on the UI on the Xbox, you're going to notice it to be very similar to what you have seen on the Xbox One, especially as far as that most recent update. They left it pretty much intact, kind of giving Xbox a one ecosystem vibe, which is fine because keep in mind, Microsoft has been tweaking this UI for over the last decade, and it is something that already felt next gen, and so here we are with it on next gen. And Sony, on the other hand, has not touched their UI in, I don't think, ever. However, they did take a new approach to it. The overall feel of it is going to be the same at its base and its core. However, when you start to get into it and you see that there's this new pop-up menu with all sorts of new options, from tracking the trophies to these new cards where you can jump to a certain part in the game, to where you can even share your footage in a picture-in-picture with your friends. Like, there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you can find, if you can find it, because it is very cumbersome. I really do love the new features of the UI on the PlayStation. It was just kind of hard to navigate. It took some time to learn it. Alright guys, let's talk about what we're actually here to do with these gaudy systems, which is to play video games. So exclusively on the PS5, we have Spider-Man, Demon Souls, and Godfall. Spider-Man is a cross-gen game, Demon Souls is a remake, and Godfall, well, just isn't that good. Whereas the Xbox has Gears Tactics, Bright Memory, and a series of optimized for Xbox games from the Xbox One. Now, neither one has that anchoring game that is just a must-play and must-buy for these consoles. I will say that the 3 games on the PS5 are way more compelling to play, and even Astro's Playroom that comes with the console is just a love note to the fans of PlayStation. It's kind of really cool to check out. Ultimately, just day one games that are optimized for these consoles, I'm probably going to have to go with the PS5 on this one. However, the Xbox does have a series of titles, again, that are optimized for the X, like Watch Dogs and Assassin's Creed and Forza, Gears 5. So it does have some titles that are worth checking out, even if you've already played them. It is also worth noting, guys, that both consoles do support backwards compatibility to some form or degree or another. The Series X has a lot more compatible titles, and it actually even does away with that 360 emulation that we used to see on the Xbox One that I absolutely hated. And then the PlayStation does have a good quantity of their PS4 titles, which are backwards compatible. Some do have issues, but it does pop up and tell you when they do have issues. So guys, with all that being said, why is it even important to go to next gen if there's no exclusive titles? Well, that's a good question, and I have some answers for you. One of the biggest difference is the actual hardware in these consoles. They both specifically run SSD drives, which makes the loading time insane. I mean, the load times are actually incredible on both of these consoles. For instance, if you've seen any of my other videos, you would see that Watch Dogs, from loading a fast travel, could do it twice before the Xbox One X could do it once. So just little things like that, that quality of life for gaming is much different. Plus, this console here does 4K at 120 frames per second. And if you ever played a game at 60 or 120 frames per second when it's stable and its variable refresh rate, you know how beautiful it is. The PS5 is no slouch either, because it will do 4K at 60 frames per second. Both consoles are capable of 8K. Again, it's nothing I have seen yet. So when actually playing my titles on both consoles compared to last gen, oh, it is well worth the price of admission in my opinion. Alright guys, so my final verdict, I think both consoles did a great job, and I think they're both worth the price of admission. As I said in the top of the show, I think both consoles achieved the same result. They just went about it a different way. Sony went with more of that risk-reward. They went bigger and over the top. However, they've been pretty stagnant since the launch of the PS4, so when this came out, it felt fresh and new and next gen. Whereas the Xbox had a huge failure on day one with the Xbox One, and they've been updating and been hard at work ever since. And this Series X is the culmination of all that hard work. So if you've had the One X, this doesn't feel as big of a generational jump for you. Now, neither console has that game right now, and I think it's too early to choose who's going to win this console war, as we always like to say. I know in the past Sony's always had the exclusives. Now that Microsoft owns half the gaming world, I think they have 18 or 19 studios, and now that they're able to have the Game Pass and be able to launch Halo and Hellblade and Fallout and Elder Scrolls and Fable, is that enough to kind of finally tilt the scales?
Gaming with Mr. C. 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 Gaming with Mr. C.